Hey there, everyone watching. Before I tell you what happened that afternoon, I just want to say, it still makes my heart race a little when I think about it. You know those moments that start off so ordinary, yet somehow end up changing how you see yourself? Yeah, this is one of those. By the way, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. I see so many of you tuning in from all over the states lately, and it makes me smile every time I read your messages. And if you enjoy real-life stories that make you feel something, stories that remind you it's never too late to rediscover a piece of yourself, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help me keep sharing these little chapters of life with you. All right, let's start. It was one of those quiet Saturdays when time feels slow, like the world's holding its breath. The rain had stopped just an hour earlier, and the driveway still glistened, tiny puddles reflecting the soft gray sky. I'd gone into the garage to look for an old photo frame I was sure I'd kept somewhere. My husband had been gone for years, my daughter was grown and out of the house most of the time, and the garage, well, it had become my little kingdom of forgotten things. I remember humming to myself, brushing the dust off boxes, when I heard the faint squeak of the back door. I didn't think much of it until a voice said softly, "Mrs. Parker?" I turned, and there he was, Daniel, my daughter's boyfriend. He looked a little awkward standing there in the doorway, his hand gripping the side of the frame. He wasn't supposed to be there that day. I think they'd had some sort of argument earlier, something small, and she'd gone out to cool off. I hadn't expected him to come by, much less find me buried in the clutter of that old garage. "Oh, Daniel," I said, brushing my hands on my jeans. "You startled me. What are you doing here?" He smiled, that polite kind of smile young people give when they don't know what else to do. "I just wanted to apologize to Emily. I didn't realize she wasn't home. I saw your car and thought maybe—" He trailed off, glancing around. "Well, she's out," I said gently. "But you can wait if you want. I was just trying to find something." He stepped closer, the faint scent of rain still on him, that mix of wet earth and something sharp, maybe his cologne. The air between us felt heavy with that strange stillness that happens when two people are caught between politeness and curiosity. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "An old frame," I said, crouching down beside a box. It had a picture of Emily when she was about 5. She'd drawn me a Mother's Day card, and I framed it. Can't believe I misplaced it. Without hesitation, he knelt beside me. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as if he didn't want to disturb the dust that carried my memories. He started opening boxes, quietly passing me things, a vase, some old holiday lights, a book with torn pages. "You kept a lot of stuff," he said after a while, smiling. "Yeah, I guess I'm sentimental." He chuckled softly. "Emily says you keep everything that means something." "She's not wrong," I replied, smiling at the thought. The light from the small garage window slanted across his face, highlighting the seriousness in his eyes. He wasn't like most young men his age. There was patience in him, a thoughtfulness. We talked as we searched, about Emily, about his work, about how hard it is sometimes to feel like you're doing enough for yourself, for others. At one point, I found an old photo of my husband, and my hands trembled a little as I held it. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything right away, just watched me with quiet understanding. "He passed away a while ago," I murmured. "It still sneaks up on me sometimes. The missing." "I can imagine," he said softly. "I lost my dad when I was 17. It never really stops, does it?" Our eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. Not in a romantic way, but in the kind of way two souls recognize each other's ache. That silent acknowledgement of shared loss. We sat there for a while, surrounded by boxes, the hum of the refrigerator in the corner filling the space between words. Then he said something that stuck with me. Sometimes I think we find people in the strangest places just to remind us we're not alone. I don't know why, but that sentence hit me deep. Maybe because I'd spent so many years feeling like the walls of that house knew more about me than anyone else. He helped me hang a few old tools back on the wall, tidying things I hadn't touched in years. The conversation became easier, lighter. We laughed about Emily's teenage years, her stubborn streak, her old messy room. And when I finally found the photo frame, the glass cracked, but the card inside still bright and innocent. I felt something warm bloom in my chest, a reminder of love, past and present, and how it still lingers in unexpected corners. Daniel smiled when I showed it to him. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. "She's lucky to have you." I looked at him, realizing that despite our age difference, despite everything that separated our worlds, there was a sense of respect there, a bridge made not of attraction or obligation, but understanding. When he left a little later, the rain had started again. Soft, steady. I stood at the door, watching him walk to his car, the sound of gravel crunching under his shoes. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. That evening, I cleaned the frame, fixed the glass, and set it on the living room shelf. As I did, I thought about how life has a way of bringing the right people at the right time, not to stay forever, but to remind us that connection still exists, even in the quietest places. And that was the day my daughter's boyfriend found me alone in the garage. But what really happened wasn't what anyone would expect. It wasn't scandal or gossip. It was two people, generations apart, finding a small moment of humanity in the dust and the rain. I didn't know it then, but that was only the beginning of what that day would change in me. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of it. Damp wood, wet grass, that faint metallic scent that always reminded me of new beginnings. I woke up earlier than usual, not because of any particular reason, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the conversation from the day before. It had been a long time since someone had listened to me like that, without judgment or rushing me to move on from the pieces of my past I still carried. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the driveway. The garage door was still slightly open, the way I'd left it after Daniel went home. I thought about closing it the night before, but something about that half-open door had felt symbolic, like I wasn't quite ready to shut away whatever had been stirred up inside me. Around 9, I heard a knock. It wasn't sharp or hurried, more like a polite rhythm, almost familiar. When I opened the door, there he was again. Daniel. He looked a little unsure, his hair still damp, a brown paper bag in one hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker," he said with a small, tentative smile. "I brought coffee and muffins." "Well," I said, surprised but not unhappy, "you didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied, stepping in when I waved him inside. "But I figured after all that dust we inhaled yesterday, you might need a reward." He was charming in a quiet, genuine way. Not showy, just kind. The kind of kindness that sneaks up on you and makes you realize how rare it is. We sat at the kitchen table, the one that still had the same small scratch my daughter had made years ago when she tried carving her initials into it. He noticed it and ran a thumb over the groove, smiling. "Emily told me she got grounded for that." "Oh, she did," I laughed. 2 weeks, but I never fixed it. Guess I liked the reminder that she was still growing up." He nodded, sipping his coffee. "I think sometimes we hold on to the marks that life leaves on things. It's proof that we were here." His words caught me off guard again. The kind of simple truth that makes you pause mid-breath. There was something steady about him. He didn't talk to fill silence. He talked when it mattered. We ended up sitting there longer than I expected. I told him about the house, how it felt too big now that Emily was gone most days, how the evenings stretched longer than they used to. He told me about his job, how he wasn't sure what direction he was heading in, how being around my daughter made him feel grounded. Then, almost hesitantly, he said, "I hope it's okay that I came by. Yesterday, it felt like we left something unfinished." "It's okay," I said softly. "I don't get much company these days. It's nice to have someone to talk to who actually listens." He looked at me, then really looked. There was no discomfort in his gaze, no awkwardness. Just that same empathy I'd seen in the garage. It wasn't flirtation. It was human recognition. After a while, I suggested we check the garage again. "There's more in there that probably needs organizing," I said, half joking. "If you're brave enough to face the dust again." He grinned. "Lead the way." The garage was cooler that morning, the air clearer now that the rain had washed away the heaviness. We opened the windows wide, letting in light. The dust motes floated lazily in the sunbeams, like tiny reminders of all the years that had passed unnoticed. We worked side by side, him lifting heavier boxes, me sorting through old heapsakes. I found my daughter's old drawings, my husband's fishing gear, even an unopened box of Christmas ornaments. Every discovery was a trip through time. At one point, I found an old tape recorder, the kind that used cassettes. I smiled and pressed play, half expecting silence, but instead my husband's voice crackled through, faint, distant, but unmistakably his. "Don't forget to buy light bulbs," he was saying, laughing in the background, "and tell Emily I love her." The sound hit me like a wave. My throat tightened, and I could feel tears building before I even tried to stop them. Daniel didn't say anything at first, just stepped closer and put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to hold it in." And I didn't. I let the tears fall quietly, not in sorrow, but in release. It had been so long since I'd allowed myself to simply feel without explaining it away. When I finally looked up, I caught him watching me, his expression full of quiet respect. He handed me a rag to wipe my eyes, saying nothing more, and that silence, that patience, meant more than any words could. Later, when the afternoon light began to fade, we sat on the old wooden step just outside the garage. The sky was painted in soft pinks and blues, the kind of sky that makes you forget the world can be loud. "Do you ever miss who you used to be?" I asked, not sure why the question slipped out. He thought for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes," he said, "but I think maybe we're supposed to. Missing it means we're still growing." That answer stayed with me long after he left. There was wisdom in him, the kind that doesn't come from years, but from paying attention to life. As I closed the garage that night, really closed it for the first time in months, I realized something had shifted inside me. I didn't feel quite so invisible anymore. Not because someone saw me, but because I'd remembered what it felt like to be present, alive, open. When I walked back into the house, the framed drawing from Emily caught the last bit of evening light. "To Mom," it said in her crooked handwriting, "for making every day bright." And for the first time in years, I believed it again. I didn't know if Daniel would stop by again, or if this was just one of those brief connections that life offers to remind you of yourself. But I knew one thing for sure. Something had awakened. Not romance, not longing, but a quiet kind of hope. And that, I thought, might be even more powerful. A few days passed before I saw Daniel again, though he lingered in my thoughts more than I expected. It wasn't the kind of preoccupation that made me restless, more like a soft echo in the back of my mind, reminding me that a simple moment of kindness can stay with you long after the person leaves. Life settled back into its usual rhythm. I watered the plants, ran errands, made dinners for one. Emily called a few times, mostly quick conversations about work or plans with friends. She didn't mention Daniel, and I didn't bring him up. There was something sacred about the quiet understanding he and I had shared, and I didn't want to tangle it in the noise of everyday relationships. Then, one Wednesday afternoon, I found myself in the garage again. I'd started turning it into a little workshop of sorts. Nothing ambitious, just a place to tinker and repurpose some old furniture. The air smelled of sawdust and polish, and I had the radio on low, an old jazz station humming softly in the background. When I heard footsteps in the driveway, I thought it might be the mailman. But then that same familiar voice called out, "Mrs. Parker, you busy?" I turned, and there he was again, holding 2 cups of coffee like peace offerings. I smiled despite myself. "You're going to spoil me if you keep showing up with coffee." He laughed, handing one to me. "Then I'm doing something right." We stood there for a moment, sipping our drinks. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was easy companionable. I noticed he seemed a little different that day, distracted maybe, like something was weighing on him. "Everything okay?" I asked. He took a breath, nodding slowly. "Yeah, just a bit of stuff on my mind. Work, mostly. And Emily." He hesitated, then went on. "I think we're at one of those points where we're both figuring out what we want. You know. And sometimes I think we're not always on the same page." I nodded, feeling the delicate line between being his confidant and being her mother. "It's normal," I said quietly. "People grow at different speeds. Sometimes love has to stretch a little to catch up." He looked at me, a small smile forming. "You always know how to put things into perspective." We spent the afternoon fixing up an old wooden table I'd nearly given up on. He sanded the edges while I worked on polishing the legs. Our hands brushed once or twice, not in a way that startled either of us, but in the kind of natural rhythm that happens when 2 people fall into easy teamwork. As the day went on, we talked about life in a way that only happens when no one's trying to impress anyone. He told me about his mother, how she'd raised him alone, how much he respected her. I told him about my early years with Emily, how hard it was juggling everything after my husband passed. There was a tenderness to those stories, the kind that connects 2 people who understand loss but still choose to believe in love, in second chances, in the quiet beauty of resilience. At one point, the wind picked up, blowing the smell of rain through the open garage door. I could feel the temperature drop slightly, and he looked up at the sky. "Looks like it's going to pour again." "Always does when I start feeling productive," I said with a smile. He laughed, then helped me move the tools inside before the first drops fell. The rain came fast, drumming on the roof like a heartbeat. We sat on 2 stools by the workbench, watching it through the open crack of the door. "I used to love the rain as a kid," he said quietly. "My ma and I would sit on the porch and just listen to it. She'd say rain makes the world start over." "That sounds like something I'd believe," I said. "It always feels like a clean slate, doesn't it?" He nodded, then added, "I think that's what I've been needing lately. A clean slate." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat with him, letting the sound of the rain fill the silence. Sometimes presence says more than advice ever could. When the rain eased, he stood and helped me clean up. Before he left, he paused at the door. "I'm really glad I came by that day," he said softly. "It's strange how one small moment can change the way you see everything." I felt my throat tighten again, the way it does when you know you've reached a turning point. "Me too, Daniel," I said. "Me too." That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I thought about what he'd said, about clean slates, about seeing things differently. I realized I'd spent so many years living through routine, keeping myself small, quiet, comfortable in my solitude. But lately, something had been stirring. Not loneliness exactly, but an awareness of how much life there still was to live, how much warmth still existed in the world if I dared to reach for it. I went back out to the garage before bed, the air still damp and cool. The table we'd worked on gleamed under the soft light. I ran my hand across its smooth surface, thinking about how it had been rough and worn just that morning. And now, after a little care, it was whole again. Maybe that's what connection does to us, I thought. It sands down the edges we've grown used to hiding behind. It reminds us that even what's been forgotten can still be restored. I didn't know what Daniel's place in my story would turn out to be, but I knew he had already left a mark, not on my heart in the way people might assume, but on the quiet spaces of my soul that had been asleep for far too long. And as I turned off the light and headed upstairs, I found myself smiling, not at the memory of him, but at the feeling of being awake again. It was nearly 2 weeks before I saw Daniel again. The days between had been slow, marked by quiet routines, the kind that let thoughts settle and drift into meaning. I spent time in the garden, rearranged the living room, even started painting again. It felt good to fill the silence with small acts of creation instead of simply waiting for something to happen. Then, one Sunday afternoon, just as the light began to turn that soft amber color that makes everything look tender, I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. I knew before I even looked who it was. There's a certain sound comfort makes when it returns to you, familiar but unexpected, like an old song you didn't realize you missed. He stood there at the door, hands in his pockets, that same thoughtful expression on his face. "Hi, Mrs. Parker," he said. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I said, smiling. "Come in. I was just making tea." He followed me to the kitchen, his presence somehow both calming and alive. There was something different about him that day, lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally lifted. "I wanted to let you know," he began, taking a deep breath. "Emily and I decided to take a break. A real one this time. We both need to figure some things out." I paused, setting the teapot down. "I see," I said softly. "It's not bad," he added quickly. "We ended on good terms. We both knew it was coming." I nodded. "That's part of growing up, Daniel. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about learning when to let go." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'd say." We sat at the table, the same one where we'd shared muffins and morning light just weeks ago. The rain had long since given way to a stretch of golden afternoons, and the air through the open window smelled of blooming jasmine. "I wanted to thank you," he said after a while, "for listening, for not judging, for reminding me that it's okay not to have everything figured out." I looked at him, and for a moment I saw not just my daughter's former boyfriend, but a young man who had become a kind of mirror, reflecting back all the parts of myself I thought were gone. The patience, the tenderness, the quiet strength. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "Sometimes people cross paths for reasons we don't understand until much later." He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "I think I'll always remember you, Mrs. Parker. You've changed the way I see things. You've reminded me that life doesn't stop just because things shift. It just reshapes." Something in my chest stirred, not sadness exactly, but something close. That bittersweet ache that comes with knowing something beautiful is ending, but has left you better for having happened at all. After tea, we walked out to the garage one last time. The old table we'd worked on together stood proudly against the wall, polished and solid. He ran a hand across it, nodding. "Still looks good." "Better than before," I said. He turned toward me, sunlight catching the edge of his face. "You should sell these, you know. You've got an eye for restoring things." I laughed softly. "Maybe I'll start small. A few old chairs, a shelf or two." He smiled, that easy, genuine smile that had grown familiar. "If you do, I'll be your first customer." We both knew this was goodbye. Not the dramatic kind, but the gentle kind that comes from mutual understanding. Life was calling him elsewhere, as it should. He was young. His story was still being written, and mine, though quieter, was far from over. When he finally left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching until his car disappeared down the street. The air was still, the world soft. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the hollow that goodbyes used to leave behind. Instead, I felt full of gratitude, of memory, of a strange peace that comes when you finally understand that connection doesn't always mean permanence. That evening, I went back to the garage. The light from the window fell across the table we'd made, and beside it, I placed a small potted plant, a bit of green to mark a new beginning. I could almost hear my husband's voice, faint but smiling. "You're doing just fine." And I was. I sat down, letting the fading sunlight touch my hands, and thought about all the ways life surprises you when you least expect it. About how healing doesn't always come from solitude. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a visitor with coffee, a shared laugh, a moment of understanding. When I finally closed the garage door, I didn't feel like I was shutting anything away. I felt like I was opening something instead, a space inside myself that was ready to live again. And that's what really happened when my daughter's boyfriend found me alone in the garage. It wasn't scandal or secrets or anything worth gossip. It was something far simpler and far more powerful. It was two lives brushing against each other just long enough to remind one another what it means to feel seen. And when I think back on it now, I smile, not because of what was, but because of what it gave me, a quiet courage to begin again.